It was supposed to be an ordinary studio photograph. A mother seated calmly. Her daughters standing close. Perfect posture, perfect silence. But photographs don't just capture faces. Sometimes they capture intent. Look closely at old images long enough, and you begin to notice things that were never meant to be seen. Hands positioned unnaturally, fingers clenched too tightly, palms hidden where they shouldn't be. Palms hidden where they shouldn't be. In 1914, one photograph passed quietly through generations without anyone questioning it. Until someone finally asked a dangerous question. What was the mother holding, and why were her daughters hiding their hands? What followed was not a haunting. Not a ghost story. It was something far worse. A legacy that learned to reach forward through time. This is not fiction. This is not folklore. This is a forgotten remnant of the past, and once you notice it, it may already be holding on to you. The photograph was dated 1914. Studio stamp in the lower right corner, matte paper. Edges worn thin from hands that had held it too often and too carefully. At first glance, it was harmless. A mother seated on a wooden chair, 2 children standing at her sides. A painted backdrop of a parlor scene behind them, pillars, curtains, a suggestion of wealth that the family clearly did not possess. Their faces were ordinary. Tired, perhaps? Formal. The way people looked when smiling was not yet expected of them. The mother's gaze was steady, unfriendly but not cruel. Her hair was pulled tight, pinned in a style already falling out of fashion even then. Her dress was dark, heavy, the kind meant to last decades. Nothing about it suggested danger. Except the hand, the right one. It rested in her lap, half-shadowed, fingers curled inward, not clenched, not relaxed. Holding something, not an object, a shape. Elias Moore noticed it only because the archivist hesitated before handing him the photograph. "You'll want gloves," she said. Her voice was careful, neutral. The way people spoke when they didn't want to explain themselves. Elias slipped the cotton gloves on and took the photograph. The room smelled of dust and old paper. The county historical office was quiet, the kind of place where sounds softened out of respect for age. He'd come looking for records tied to a demolished boarding house, a routine job for a preservation consultant. This photograph wasn't on the list. He shouldn't have been shown it at all. Where did this come from? Elias asked. The archivist didn't answer immediately. When she did, she said, "It doesn't have a provenance." "It's always just been here." Elias frowned and looked closer. The children's hands were visible. Small. Clean. Resting stiffly at their sides. The mother's left hand lay open on her knee. The right one hid itself. Elias felt a faint pressure in his own palm. He flexed his fingers inside the gloves, annoyed at himself. "Who are they?" he asked. "No names," the archivist replied. "No negatives. No second print." Elias lifted the photograph closer to the light. The mother's right thumb was positioned strangely, angled inward as though bracing something that didn't want to be seen. The skin at her knuckles was stretched, pale compared to the rest of her hand. There was depth there, too much for empty air. Elias tilted the photograph slightly. The shadow in her palm shifted. His breath caught. Inside the curve of her fingers, partially obscured by shadow and grain, was the unmistakable outline of another hand. Smaller, paler, pressed flat against her skin from the inside of the photograph. Elias lowered the image abruptly. "That wasn't there," he said. The archivist's expression tightened. "It always is." The pressure in Elias's palm returned, stronger this time. Not painful. Just present. Like someone resting their hand over his, testing weight. He handed the photograph back. "I don't think this is related to my project." The archivist nodded, as though she'd expected that. As Elias turned to leave, she spoke again. "If you ever see another one like it," she said, "don't hold it too long." He laughed politely and left. That night, he dreamed of the photograph. Not of faces, not of the studio, of hands. Hands layered over hands, some small, some grown, all pressed together with deliberate care. He felt them against his skin, aligning, adjusting, correcting. When he woke, his right palm tingled. On his desk sat an envelope, no return address. Inside was the photograph, the same one, 1914. The studio stamp was clearer now. The ink darker, fresher. Elias stared at it, heart pounding. He knew, without any proof, that he hadn't taken it, and yet his fingerprints were on the back, clear, pressed deep. The mother's hand looked different. Her fingers were more relaxed now, less strained, as though whatever she had been holding had finally settled. Elias's gaze dropped to his own hand. His fingers were curled inward, mimicking the shape. The pressure returned, gentle, instructive, like something teaching him how to hold. Elias did not touch the photograph again. He left it on his desk, face down, as though sight itself might encourage it. Still, he felt it, an awareness that lingered like a presence just outside his vision. The pressure in his palm faded by morning, but the memory of it did not. He took the photograph back to the county office the next day. The archivist was not there. Her desk sat empty, drawers pulled open, folders stacked neatly as if awaiting review. A different clerk looked up when Elias approached, confusion flickering across his face when Elias mentioned the photograph. "What photograph?" the clerk asked. "The 1914 studio portrait," Elias said. "The mother and children." The clerk shook his head. "We don't have anything like that." Elias felt his stomach drop. "You do," he insisted. "It was in your private files. No provenance." The clerk frowned and stood, walking Elias into the back storage room. They searched shelves and drawers together. Boxes were opened. Catalog numbers checked. Nothing. No record. No envelope. No photograph. When Elias returned home, the envelope sat on his desk again. Open. The photograph lay inside, face up this time. The mother's right hand had changed. The fingers were slightly more open, the thumb no longer bracing so tightly. The shape beneath her palm was clearer now. The second hand pressed back. Its fingers were longer than a child's. Not fully grown. Something in between. Elias backed away slowly. That night, he researched the studio stamp. The name was faint, but legible under magnification. H. Calder Studio. The address led to a narrow street in a city that had restructured itself 3 times since 1914. Records showed the studio operated for less than a year. No advertisements after spring. No closing notice. Just silence. A fire, according to one article. Another mentioned an inspection. A third hinted at irregular practices, though no charges were listed. Elias found a single surviving ledger in a private collection, a photographer's logbook rescued from an estate sale. The handwriting was neat, almost delicate. Names. Dates. Notes. Then the tone shifted. Client insists on retake. Hand placement incorrect. Subject uncomfortable. Complains of pressure. Mother requests adjustment. Says hand must be held. Further down. Negative, unusable. Image refuses alignment. Second exposure successful only after stillness achieved. Elias's skin prickled. The final entry read, "No more retakes." The photograph holds. Elias slept poorly. He woke to the sound of breathing. Not his own. He sat upright, heart hammering, scanning the dark apartment. The sound came again, slow, measured, close, from his desk. The photograph lay exposed, the envelope pushed aside. The mother's gaze seemed heavier now, more focused. The children's faces were unchanged, but their posture felt tighter, as though drawn inward. Elias approached, despite himself. The pressure returned instantly, blooming across his palm, stronger than before. He gasped as his fingers curled inward without command, mimicking the mother's grip. Inside the photograph, the hidden hand shifted, its fingers aligned with his own. Elias yanked his hand back, nearly tearing the photograph in half. The pressure vanished. He stared at the image, breathing hard. The mother's hand was open now, empty. The space beneath it darkened, as though something had moved forward. Elias understood then. The photograph did not trap people by force. It taught them. It learned the shape of hands, the weight of resistance, the comfort of pressure. And once it learned you, it remembered. Elias sealed the photograph in a drawer and weighted it shut. But that night, he dreamed of a studio, of lights too bright, of a chair too hard, of a voice behind a camera saying, "Hold still." Just like that. When he woke, his hand was raised, curled, holding nothing, or waiting to. Elias stopped trying to destroy the photograph, tearing it, burning it, soaking it. Every method passed through his mind and died there. The image felt less like paper now, and more like a thing that would resist in subtle ways, not by stopping him outright, but by waiting until his hands failed him. Instead, he began to study it. Under stronger light, magnification revealed details he hadn't noticed before. The mother's right wrist showed faint discoloration, a darker ring just beneath the cuff of her sleeve, as if something had rested there repeatedly. The fabric itself was worn thin at that point, fibers polished smooth by pressure. This wasn't the first photograph. It was the one that worked. Elias returned to the studio address. The building was gone, replaced by a narrow row of shops, but the alley behind them remained unchanged, tight, shadowed, damp even in sunlight. Old brick still showed burn marks near the foundation. A shop owner told him the fire had been strange. "Didn't spread," the man said. "Just the studio." Like it knew where to stop. Elias stood where the entrance would have been and closed his eyes. He felt it immediately. The pressure, gentle, familiar, as if the air itself were testing his hands, gauging their willingness to hold. That night, the dreams returned, but this time, they were clearer. He saw the studio as it had been. The mother sat stiffly in the chair, children arranged beside her. The photographer adjusted the lens, frowning. "Your hand." the photographer said. "It won't settle." The mother looked down at her lap. Her right hand trembled slightly. "It doesn't like to be seen," she replied. The photographer laughed nervously. "Hands don't have opinions." The mother didn't smile. "Mine does." The dream shifted. The photographer repositioned her fingers, prying them open gently. The moment he did, the pressure snapped tight around his wrist. He gasped, fingers locking in place as though guided. The mother watched calmly. "Hold it," she said. "That's how it learns." The shutter clicked. The dream dissolved into darkness, and Elias woke, screaming, clutching his wrist. The photograph was on his chest. The mother's hand had changed again. Now it rested more naturally, fingers curved just enough to suggest possession without effort. Beneath her palm, the hidden hand was clearer than ever. It was not hers. It was adult. The realization hit Elias with sickening force. This wasn't about children. This wasn't about lineage or family. It was about continuation. The photograph did not care who you were. It cared whether you stayed still long enough. Elias found another record days later, a coroner's note buried in municipal archives. An unidentified man, presumed photographer, found dead in his studio. No signs of struggle. Hands rigid, fingers locked inward. Cause of death listed as quote, 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 quote. The note ended with a single odd observation. Right hand clenched around nothing. Could not be pried open. Elias's hands ached constantly now. Not pain, pressure memory. His fingers curled when he was tired, when he wasn't paying attention, when he thought too long about the photograph. The image no longer stayed in the drawer. It appeared where he was, on the desk, on the table. Once, on the pillow beside him. Each time, the mother's grip looked easier. Practiced. Elias realized the truth too late. The photograph was not finished. The mother was not the subject. She was the teacher, and the thing she hid in her hand was never meant to stay with her forever. It was meant to be passed on. Elias tried gloves, thick ones, leather-lined. Workman's gloves meant to protect bone and skin from injury. They did nothing. The pressure found him anyway, settling around his wrists like a memory his body refused to forget. It came most clearly when he wasn't looking at the photograph, when his attention drifted, when his guard fell. That was when his fingers curled, not suddenly, carefully, as if being adjusted by something patient enough to wait for compliance. He woke one morning to find his right hand clenched so tightly his nails had cut into his palm. Blood dotted the sheets. The pain arrived only after he noticed it. The photograph lay on the floor beside the bed, closer than it had ever been. The mother's gaze had changed. Not softer, focused, as though she were no longer looking at the camera, but at him. Elias stopped leaving the apartment. Food went untouched. The phone rang until it stopped ringing. Time lost its edges, days blurring together in the same dim light. He watched the photograph change, slowly, incrementally. The hidden hand beneath the mother's palm grew clearer, more defined. Its knuckles sharpened. The wrist lengthened. The fingers learned where to rest. It was learning his hand. One night, Elias noticed something new. The children's hands were no longer empty. Each held something small and pale, barely visible against the backdrop. Not objects. Fingers. Tiny impressions at first, like chalk marks. Then shadows. Then shape. The photograph wasn't finished with one lesson. It taught everyone. Elias screamed and threw the photograph across the room. The glass didn't break. It landed face up, waiting. That was when the dreams stopped being dreams. He was awake when he heard the shutter. A sharp click. The sound echoed through the apartment, clean and unmistakable. Elias froze. His right arm lifted against his will, elbow bending slowly, hand curling inward. The pressure was overwhelming now. Precise, instructive, intimate. He fought it, gasping, muscles burning. The photograph slid across the floor toward him. Inside it, the mother's hand opened. Inviting. "No," Elias whispered. "I won't hold it." The pressure tightened. The air thickened, heavy as breath held too long. The walls seemed to lean inward, the room narrowing around him. The photograph spoke, not with a voice, with sensation, with the certainty of alignment. This is how it fits. This is how it stays. Elias grabbed a chair and smashed it down onto the photograph. The glass cracked this time, a thin fracture splitting the surface. The image warped around the break, the mother's fingers stretching unnaturally as though resisting separation. From inside the crack, something pressed outward. A fingertip, pale, desperate. Elias recoiled, heart hammering. The pressure vanished. Instantly, the silence afterward was worse. He understood then. Resistance delayed it. Breaking it weakened it. But teaching it something new, that changed it. Elias remembered the studio ledger. The line that haunted him, Second exposure, successful only after stillness achieved. Stillness wasn't submission, it was instruction. The photograph had learned how to hold by watching others fail. What if it could learn how to release? Elias tore the photograph from its frame and pinned it flat to the table. His hands trembled violently, but he forced them open, stretching his fingers wide, holding them there despite the pain. He traced his open palm over the image, slowly, deliberately. The pressure returned, but confused now. Uncertain. His fingers refused to curl. Inside the photograph, the mother's hand hesitated. For the first time, it did not know what to do. Elias held his palm open. Minutes passed. The pressure eased. The hidden hand beneath the mother's palm loosened slightly. The photograph shuddered. Elias collapsed to his knees, sobbing. The photograph did not move that night, but in the morning, something had changed. The mother's hand was open, empty, and for the first time since Elias had seen it, the children were looking at her, not the camera. The photograph no longer followed Elias. That was how he knew something had gone wrong. For days, it stayed exactly where he left it, pinned flat to the table, edges curling slightly, the crack in the glass spreading like a vein. The pressure in his wrists faded to a dull echo, a sensation that came only when he thought about closing his hands, which he avoided. He slept with his fingers splayed open, palms facing upward, muscles aching from the effort. When exhaustion finally forced his hands to curl, he woke immediately, heart racing, as though caught in the act of something forbidden. The photograph watched, not actively, patiently. The mother's hand remained open. Too open. The fingers stiff, strained in a way that suggested they were not meant to rest that way for long. Elias noticed the children first. Their eyes had shifted completely now, no longer staring forward but angled upward toward the mother's hands. Their expressions were no longer blank. They were expectant. The photograph was waiting for instruction. Elias returned to the archives one final time. The archivist was back. She looked older, paler, as though she'd been ill. "You brought it back," she said before Elias could speak. "I never took it," he replied. She nodded. "No one ever does." He placed the photograph on the counter. Her breath caught. "It's changing," she whispered. "Yes," Elias said. "Because it learned something else." She didn't ask what. She only reached for it and stopped just short of touching the glass. "They never keep them open," she said. "Not for long." Elias swallowed. "What happens if it doesn't learn how to hold again?" The archivist closed her eyes. "It finds someone new," she said. "Someone whose hands still remember how." That night, Elias made a decision. He returned home and stood before the photograph. The air felt tense, coiled. His wrists tingled, faint but insistent, as though the image were reminding him of what he could still become. He raised his hands, not curled, not clenched. "Open. I won't teach you again," he said quietly. "I won't hold you." The photograph trembled. The mother's hand twitched. From the open palm, something began to slip. Not a hand. A shape. Impression. Pressure memory made visible. It felt like dust settling at the bottom of the image, leaving behind a faint stain where it had once been. The children's faces changed. They looked frightened now. The photograph darkened around the edges, the studio backdrop blurring into nothing. The figures flattened, losing depth, losing intention. The image was forgetting. The pressure surged violently. One final attempt. Fingers tightening around Elias's wrists, begging, demanding. He screamed and forced his hands open wider. The sensation snapped. The photograph cracked fully down the center, splitting the mother cleanly in two. The children vanished entirely, erased like chalk smeared by a careless hand. Silence flooded the room. The photograph lay still, lifeless, just paper. Elias collapsed to the floor, shaking. Morning light crept in through the window. The photograph did not move, did not watch, did not remember. Elias wrapped it carefully and placed it in a box. He would destroy it. He had to, but as he sealed the lid, he noticed something carved into the inside of the cardboard, scratched deep and deliberate. Handprints, small, adult, layered, waiting. Elias burned the box at dawn. He chose the riverbank beyond the mill, where the fog rose thick and close, where no one came unless they were lost or looking to be. He stacked dry wood, soaked it in kerosene, and placed the box at the center like an offering. When the match struck, his hands shook, but they closed. The flame caught. Cardboard blackened. The lid curled inward. Smoke lifted in slow, deliberate strands, as if reluctant to leave. Elias watched until the fire consumed everything, until there was nothing left but ash and a faint chemical sting in the air. Only then did he exhale. The pressure was gone. His wrists were his own again. He flexed his fingers, clenched them into fists, opened them wide. No echo, no resistance, no memory pushing back. The photograph was finished. So he believed. That night, Elias dreamed of hands, not his. They moved without arms, without bodies. Impressions pressing through darkness, testing space. They searched the way roots search soil, blindly patient, certain that something living would eventually be found. He woke with his palms pressed flat against the mattress, fingers spread to the point of pain. And still no pressure. Days passed. Then weeks. The town returned to its rhythms. The archives reopened under new supervision. The mill whistle blew again at dawn. Elias resumed his work, sleeping better than he had in months. Until the envelope arrived. No stamp, no return address. Just his name, written carefully, like someone copying it for the first time. Inside was a photograph, not the one he burned. A studio portrait dated 1914. A mother seated. 2 daughters standing at her side, perfectly ordinary. Except for the hands. The mother's right hand rested in her lap, fingers curled inward, tight and strained, as though holding something that did not wish to be held. The daughters' hands were hidden behind their backs. Elias felt it then, a faint, curious pressure at his wrists. Not a grip. A question. He dropped the photograph. It did not crack. It did not move, but the air around it felt warmer. Expectant. Elias backed away, heart pounding. "No," he whispered. "I didn't teach you." The pressure increased. Not forceful, not cruel. Gentle. Insistent. Like a child offering its hand. Elias understood. The image did not need to be taught again. It had been watching for generations, learning from others, from archivists who touched glass too long, from photographers who adjusted poses with bare hands, from viewers who lingered, fingers curled unconsciously, imagining what it must have felt like to hold still forever. The photograph didn't remember him. It remembered the shape of wanting. The pressure slid down his wrists, settling into his palms. His fingers began to curl, not against his will, but with a terrible familiarity. Outside, somewhere in the town, a camera shutter clicked. Elias screamed and threw the photograph into the fireplace. The flame licked the edge of the paper. The image darkened. The mother's hand loosened. The daughter's hands emerged, open, reaching forward, clearer than before. The pressure surged, sharp and complete. And then, nothing. The fire went out. The photograph lay untouched, resting in cold ash. The hands were no longer visible. Because they were no longer inside the image. Elias fell to his knees, clutching his own hands as they trembled, fingers frozen halfway between open and closed. In the morning, the house was empty. No signs of struggle. No photograph. Only faint handprints on the inside of the windows, smeared outward, as though something had learned at last how to leave. And somewhere, waiting patiently in a drawer, an album, a frame on a wall, another harmless old photograph was learning how to hold. Old photographs don't fade. They wait. They survive fires, floods, forgotten attics, and generations of silence. They outlive the people who believed they were safe. And sometimes, they learn. If you ever find an old portrait where the hands seem wrong, where fingers curl as if gripping something invisible, do not touch the glass too long. Do not imagine what it feels like to hold still forever, because some images were never meant to be remembered, and once they are seen, they don't stay where they belong. This story was not meant to scare you. It was meant to warn you. You've been watching Forgotten Remains. And somewhere, an old photograph is waiting for someone new to hold its hand.